30 years ago, 3 boys vanished into the fog-choked woods of Dusty Hollow, Texas, leaving only a haunting photograph and a trail of secrets. Now, Evie Marlowe uncovers a chilling web of lies involving a sinister farm, a corrupt sheriff, and a man who might be her lost son. Each clue drags her deeper into danger, where the truth could cost her everything. Will she find justice or become the next victim? This story is fictional, crafted from real-life inspirations for education and entertainment. Stick around, the twists will keep you glued to the end. The fog rolled thick over Dusty Hollow, Texas, a forgotten speck of a town 20 miles north of Laredo, where the air smelled of dust and secrets. Evie Marlowe stood alone in her cramped living room, the only light coming from a flickering lamp that cast jagged shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Her trembling hands clutched an old photograph, its edges worn soft from years of desperate handling. In the grainy image, 3 boys grinned at the camera, their gap-toothed smiles frozen in a moment 30 years gone. Her boys, her babies, vanished without a trace in the summer of '95, swallowed by the sprawling woods behind this very house. Evie's breath hitched as she traced a finger over the face of Tommy, her youngest, barely 6 when he disappeared. His blue eyes seemed to stare back, pleading. She whispered to the photo, her voice hoarse from too many sleepless nights. "Y'all are still out there, ain't you? I can feel it. I ain't given up." A faint sound snapped her out of her trance, a giggle, high-pitched and childish, drifting through the open window. Evie froze, her heart pounding like a jackhammer. The giggle came again, clearer now, from the direction of the forest. She dropped the photograph, letting it flutter to the hardwood floor, and stumbled to the window. The fog was a gray wall, swallowing the pines that loomed beyond her backyard. "Tommy?" she called, her voice cracking. "Danny? Luke?" No answer. Just the rustle of leaves and that eerie giggle, fading into the night. Evie grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as she bolted for the back door. The screen door creaked as she flung it open, the damp air hitting her like a slap. She swept the flashlight's beam across the yard, its weak light barely cutting through the mist. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. Her beam caught something on the edge of the porch, a small, mud-caked shoe, its laces frayed and knotted. Evie's stomach lurched. It was a boy's sneaker, scuffed and faded, but unmistakable. The same kind Tommy wore the day he vanished. She dropped to her knees, her fingers brushing the leather, caked with dirt that smelled of pine and decay. "No," she whispered, clutching the shoe to her chest. "No, no, no." The giggle came again, closer now, from the tree line. Evie's head snapped up, her flashlight trembling in her grip. A shadow flickered between the pines, small and fleeting, like a child darting out of sight. She staggered to her feet, the shoe still clutched in one hand, and took a step toward the forest. "Tommy?" she screamed, her voice raw. "I'm coming for you." But the shadow was gone, and the forest fell silent, leaving only the thud of her heart and the weight of 30 years of unanswered questions. The next morning, Dusty Hollow buzzed with its usual small-town rhythm, oblivious to Evie's sleepless night. The town was a relic, 3,000 souls clinging to a handful of dusty streets, a diner called Mabel's, and a bar where the jukebox hadn't worked since Reagan was president. The forest, a tangled sprawl of pines and oaks, loomed over everything, its shadows stretching across the town like fingers. Folks whispered about those wood stories of strange lights, whispers in the dark, kids who wandered in and never came out. Evie had heard them all, but 30 years ago, she'd laughed them off. Not anymore. She sat at her kitchen table, the shoe from the porch now cleaned and placed beside the photograph. Walter, her husband, slumped in a chair across from her, nursing a lukewarm Budweiser. His gray hair was thinning, his face lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying grief for decades. Once a deputy with the county sheriff's office, Walter had been fired after the boys disappeared, his obsession with the case driving him to punch a reporter who called it a cold trail. Now he spent his days tinkering with a busted Ford pickup, and his nights scribbling in a leather-bound notebook, filled with wild theories. "You gotta stop this, Evie," Walter said, his voice rough as gravel. He took a swig of beer, his eyes fixed on the shoe. It's just some kid's sneaker. Could be anybody's. You're chasing ghosts again. It's Tommy's, Evie snapped, her fingers tightening around the photograph. Same brand, same size. You think I don't know my own boy's shoes? Walter sighed, rubbing his temples. It's been 30 years, darling. You really think someone's leaving clues on our porch now, after all this time? Evie didn't answer. She couldn't. The shoe wasn't just a clue, it was a taunt, a cruel reminder of the night her world fell apart. She'd been a reporter back then, working for the Laredo Times, chasing stories about City Hall corruption and border smugglers. She'd thought she could solve anything, but when her boys vanished, she'd found nothing. No footprints, no witnesses, no bodies. Just a void that swallowed her life. She stood and crossed to the living room, where a cardboard box sat in the corner, stuffed with relics of her boys. A baseball glove, a toy truck, a dog-eared comic book. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping, its headline stark, 3 boys missing in Dusty Hollow, police baffled. Below it was a name that still made her skin crawl, Howard Fielding, the boy's schoolteacher, who'd left town days after the disappearance. The article mentioned him briefly, a person of interest who'd never been charged. Evie had always suspected him, but the sheriff's office had dismissed her, calling her a grieving mother grasping at straws. Walter, she said, holding up the clipping. You remember Howard, that teacher who was always so damn sweet to the boys? Gave him candy, invited him to his house for special lessons. Walter's jaw tightened. Yeah, I remember. Slippery bastard. Skipped town before I could get my hands on him. He's back, Evie said, her voice low. I heard he's running some charity farm out by Route 66, Howard's Haven for Hope, they call it, for kids. Walter's eyes narrowed. You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking we need to pay him a visit, Evie said, her voice steely. And I'm thinking that shoe didn't end up on our porch by accident. The sun was dipping low when Evie drove her rattling Chevy to the town park, a patchy field with a sagging pavilion where Dusty Hollow held its birthdays and barbecues. She'd been invited to a kids' party by Mabel, the diner owner, who'd taken pity on her after years of watching her spiral. Evie didn't want to gush, hated crowds, hated the pitying stares, but Mabel had insisted, saying it'd do her good. Now, as she parked near the pavilion, she regretted it. Kids ran screaming across the grass, their laughter a knife in her chest. She scanned the crowd, her eyes catching on a boy, maybe 10 years old, chasing a soccer ball. He wore a faded denim jacket, its sleeves too long, flapping as he ran. Evie's breath caught. It was the same jacket Danny, her middle boy, had worn the day he disappeared, blue, with a red patch on the elbow. She stumbled out of the car, her heart racing, and pushed through the crowd. Hey, she called, her voice sharp. The boy stopped, turning to face her. His eyes were wide, confused, but they weren't Danny's. Still, that jacket. She grabbed his arm, gentler than she meant to, and knelt to his level. Where'd you get this jacket, kid? The boy yanked his arm back, scared. My dad gave it to me. Let go. A man pushed through the crowd, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was broad-shouldered, with a grease-stained t-shirt and a scowl that could curdle milk. What's going on here? He demanded, pulling the boy behind him. You messing with my kid? Evie stood, her hand shaking. That jacket, she said, pointing. It's my boy's. Where'd you get it? The man Ray, she recognized him now, a mechanic from the auto shop on Main Street, snorted. Lady, you're nuts. It's just a damn jacket from Goodwill. Back off. It's not just a jacket, Evie said, her voice rising. My son was wearing one just like it when he disappeared. You tell me where you got it, or I swear. Enough. A woman's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. Clara Hensley, a tall figure in a long black coat, stepped between them. Her eyes were cold, her lips a thin line. Mrs. Marlowe, you're causing a scene. Maybe it's time you let the past stay buried. Evie's blood ran cold. Clara ran Howard's Haven for Hope, and her presence here, watching her, felt like a warning. I ain't burying nothing, Evie said, her voice low. Not till I find my boys. Sem. Clara's smile was thin, almost predatory. Some secrets are better left in the dark, darlin'. Evie turned away, her mind racing. Ray's scowl, Clara's warning, the jacket, it was all connected. She could feel it. She drove home. The boy's face burned into her mind, and found Walter in the garage, his notebook open on the workbench. Ray Delgado's kid was wearing Danny's jacket, she said, slamming the car door. And Clara Hensley was there, acting like she knows something. Walter looked up, his eyes dark. Clara? She's tied to Howard, ain't she? Evie nodded, pulling the newspaper clipping from her pocket. We need to dig into Howard's Haven. Something ain't right. Walter flipped open his notebook, revealing a page scrawled with names, dates, and a crude drawing of a 5-pointed star. Found this in the boys' room, back then, he said, tapping the drawing, carved into the floor under Danny's bed. Never figured out what it meant. Evie's stomach twisted. She'd seen that star before on a necklace Danny used to wear, a gift from Howard. She hadn't thought about it in years, but now it felt like a clue, sharp and dangerous. That night, Evie couldn't sleep. The shoe sat on her nightstand, its laces curling like snakes. She kept replaying the giggle from the forest, the shadow she'd seen. At 2 a.m, her phone rang, the sound jarring in the silent house. She grabbed it, her heart pounding. No caller ID. Hello? She whispered. A voice, low and raspy, hissed through the line. Stop digging, or you'll end up like them. Who is this? Evie demanded, but the line went dead. She stumbled to the window, her flashlight sweeping the yard. The fog was thicker now, the forest a black void. Then she saw at the back door, wide open, swinging in the wind. She hadn't touched it. Walter, she screamed, but he was already there, his old service revolver in hand. They stepped onto the porch, the fog swallowing their flashlight beams. Something glinted on the ground, a small, silver object, half buried in the dirt. Evie knelt, her fingers brushing cold metal. It was a necklace, its pendant shaped like a 5-pointed star. Jesus, Walter whispered, his voice shaking. That's Danny's. Evie clutched the necklace, her vision blurring with tears. The forest loomed before them, its shadows whispering secrets. Someone was watching, someone new. And they weren't done with her yet. Evie Marlowe hadn't slept since the phone call. The raspy voice, stop digging, or you'll end up like them, echoed in her skull, a taunt that clung like damp fog. She sat at her kitchen table, the silver star-shaped necklace from the porch glinting under the weak morning light. Beside it lay Tommy's shoe, its mud-caked laces still knotted, and the faded photograph of her 3 boys, their smiles haunting her. 30 years ago, they'd vanished into the forest behind her house in Dusty Hollow, Texas, a speck of a town 20 miles from Laredo. Now, the past was clawing its way back, and Evie wasn't about to let it slip away again. Walter shuffled in, his boots scuffing the linoleum floor. His bloodshot eyes flicked to the necklace, then to Evie. You look like hell, he muttered, popping the tab on a Budweiser. Still thinking about that call? It wasn't a prank, Walt, Evie said, her voice sharp as a razor. Someone knows something. That shoe, this necklace, it's them. Our boys. Walter sighed, slumping into a chair. His hands, rough from years of wrenching on his busted Ford pickup, toyed with the notebook he'd kept since the boys disappeared. Pages filled with scribbled theories, most too wild to believe. Evie, we've been down this road. You're gonna drive yourself crazy. Again. Then let me, she snapped, slamming the necklace on the table. This is Danny's, you know it is. And that jacket I saw yesterday at the park, it's his too. I ain't imagining this. Walter's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He'd seen the necklace, recognized the star pendant Danny had worn like a badge, a gift from their old teacher, Howard Fielding. The same Howard, who'd skipped town days after the boys vanished, leaving nothing but whispers and a trail of suspicion. Evie had spent years chasing leads on him, only to hit dead ends. Now, word was he'd slunk back to Dusty Hollow, running some charity farm called Howard's Haven for Hope, 5 miles out on Route 66. The thought of him near kids again made Evie's skin crawl. "We're going to that party tonight," Evie said, standing. "Mabel invited us to her grandson's birthday at the park. That's where I saw that kid in Danny's jacket. I'm talking to his dad, whether he likes it or not." "Yes." Walter raised an eyebrow, his beer halfway to his lips. "Ray Delgado? That grease monkey's trouble, Evie. You sure you want to poke that bear?" "I ain't poking," she said, her eyes blazing. "I'm digging, and if Ray knows something about my boy's jacket, he's gonna spill." The town park was a sorry patch of grass, hemmed in by sagging chain-link fences and dotted with picnic tables that hadn't been painted since Nixon. By dusk, it was alive with kids hollering, chasing balloons, and stuffing their faces with cake. The air smelled of charcoal and cheap hot dogs, and a country song crackled through a portable speaker. Evie stood on the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, scanning for the boy she'd seen yesterday. Walter lingered behind her, nursing a Coke and muttering about how they should have stayed home. "There," Evie said, her voice low. She nodded toward a kid kicking a soccer ball near the pavilion. He was 10, maybe 11, with messy brown hair and that denim jacket, its red elbow patch catching the fading sunlight. Her heart thudded. It was Danny's, down to the frayed cuffs. She started toward him, but a hand grabbed her arm. "Easy, darlin'," Walter said. "Don't scare the kid. Let's find his dad first." Evie shook him off but nodded, her eyes locked on the boy. She spotted Ray Delgado by a cooler, cracking open a beer with a scowl that could peel paint. He was built like a linebacker, his t-shirt stained with motor oil, his dark eyes darting around like he was waiting for trouble. Evie marched over, her boots crunching gravel, and stopped a foot from him. "Ray," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "We need to talk about your boy's jacket." Ray's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around the beer can. "What is it with you and that damn jacket?" "I told you, it's from Goodwill. You got a problem, take it up with them." "It's my son's," Evie said, stepping closer. "Danny Marlowe. He was wearing one just like it when he disappeared 30 years ago. You tell me where you got it, Ray, or I swear You'll what?" Ray cut her off, his voice a low growl. He leaned in, his breath sour with beer. "You're crazy, lady. Back off my kid, or you'll regret it." The crowd hushed, heads turning. Evie's hands balled into fists, but before she could snap back, a woman's voice sliced through the tension. "Mrs. Marlowe, you're making a scene." Clara Hensley stepped forward, her long black coat brushing the grass. Her eyes were cold as a winter pond, her lips curled in a smile that didn't reach them. "Maybe it's time you let sleeping dogs lie." Evie's blood ran hot. Clara ran Howard's Haven for hope, and her showing up here, watching her like a hawk, wasn't a coincidence. "I ain't letting nothing lie," Evie said, her voice low and dangerous. "Not when my boys are still out there." Clara's smile tightened. "Some secrets are better left buried, darlin'. You keep digging, you might not like what you find." Walter stepped up, his hand on Evie's shoulder. "Come on, Evie, let's go." But his eyes stayed on Clara, hard and suspicious. Evie didn't move. She stared at Ray, then at the boy, who'd stopped kicking his ball and was watching them, wide-eyed. Something glinted at his Throwata necklace, its pendant, a 5-pointed star, just like Danny's. Her stomach dropped. "Where'd you get that necklace, kid?" she called, her voice trembling. Ray grabbed the boy's arm, pulling him away. "Enough, lady. Stay away from us." He stormed off, the boy stumbling behind him, but not before the necklace slipped from his shirt and fell to the grass. Evie lunged for it, her fingers closing around the cold metal. The star pendant was scratched, but unmistakable. She clutched it, her vision blurring. "This is Danny's," she whispered, her voice breaking. Clara's eyes flicked to the necklace, her smile gone. "You're treading on thin ice, Mrs. Marlowe," she said, then turned and melted into the crowd. Back at home, Evie and Walter sat in the dim living room, the box of their boys' things open between them. The necklace lay on the coffee table, next to Tommy's shoe and the photograph. Evie's hand shook as she rifled through the box, pulling out a stack of letters tied with a rubber band. Most were birthday cards from relatives, but one stood out, a single sheet of paper, folded tight, written in red ink. She unfolded it, her breath catching. The handwriting was neat, almost too perfect, and signed with a flourish. Howard Fielding. The letter was addressed to Danny, dated a week before the boys disappeared. Dear Danny, it read, I've got a special trip planned for you and your brothers. The forest holds the truth. Meet me at the oak by the creek. Don't tell your folks. Evie's heart stopped. Walter, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Look at this. He leaned over, his face darkening as he read. That son of a bitch, he growled, slamming his fist on the table. He was planning something. He took him. Evie's mind raced. Howard Fielding, the boys' teacher, had always been too sweet, too attentive. He'd given them candy, invited them to his house for extra lessons. She'd thought he was just kind, but now the memory felt slimy, sinister. He's back at that farm, she said. Howard's Haven. We're going tomorrow. Walter nodded, his jaw tight. If he's got answers, I'll beat him out of him. Evie opened Walter's notebook, flipping to the page with the 5-pointed star. This was under Danny's bed, Walter said, his voice low. I found it the day after they went missing. Thought it was just a kid's doodle, but now, it's the same as the necklace, Evie said, holding up the pendant. And the kid at the party had one too. It's all connected, Walt. They sat in silence, the weight of the letter and the necklace pressing down on them. The forest outside was dark, the fog creeping closer, curling around the house like a living thing. Evie's eyes drifted to the photograph, her boys' faces staring back. She could almost hear their laughter, the way it used to fill the house. Now, it was just a ghost, taunting her from the woods. That night, Evie couldn't stay still. She paced the house, the letter from Howard clutched in her hand. At midnight, she slipped on her boots and drove to Ray Delgado's place, a rundown trailer on the edge of town. The street was quiet, the only sound the hum of cicadas and the distant bark of a dog. Ray's truck was parked out front, its hood still warm. She crept closer, her flashlight off, to avoid being seen. A flicker of light caught her eye flames, low and orange, in the backyard. Ray stood by a fire pit, tossing something into the blaze. It was a wooden box, its edges carved with faint stars. Evie's heart pounded. She edged closer, hiding behind a rusted shed, and watched as the flames devoured the box. Ray's face was tight, his eyes darting like he knew someone was watching. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but before she could move, a sound stopped her cold, a child's giggle, soft and eerie, coming from the trailer. She turned, her breath hitching, and saw a small figure in the window, silhouetted against the dim light. It was the boy from the party, his eyes locked on her, unblinking. The star necklace glinted at his throat. Evie stumbled back, her boots catching on a root. The boy didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, his face pale and unreadable. Then the trailer door creaked open, and Ray's shadow filled the frame. "Who's out there?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. Evie ran, her heart slamming against her ribs, the necklace clutched tight in her fist. She didn't stop until she was back in her car, the engine roaring to life. As she peeled away, the boy's face burned in her mind, those eyes too old for a child, too knowing. Someone was sending her a message, and they were watching her every move. The fog clung to Dusty Hollow like a bad memory, wrapping the town in a gray haze that made every shadow feel alive. Evie Marlowe gripped the steering wheel of her Chevy, her knuckles white, as she and Walter drove down Route 66, 5 miles out of town. The star-shaped necklace from Danny, her middle boy, hung heavy in her pocket, its cold metal a constant reminder of the night before Ray Delgado burning that carved wooden box. The boy's eerie stare from the trailer window. She hadn't told Walter about sneaking to Ray's place. He'd call her reckless, maybe worse. But she couldn't shake the image of that kid, his eyes too old, too knowing, wearing her son's necklace. "You sure about this?" Walter asked, his voice rough from too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. He sat shotgun, his old service revolver tucked under his jacket, his notebook open on his lap. The page showed a crude sketch of a 5-pointed star, the same one carved under Danny's bed 30 years ago. Howard's Haven ain't exactly a welcome mat. Folks say it's a place for lost kids, but I don't trust it. Neither do I, Evie said, her eyes fixed on the road. Howard Fielding was the last one to see our boys. That letter we found? The forest holds the truth. He knows something, Walt. I can feel it in my bones. Heim. The letter, written in red ink and signed by Howard, had been a gut punch. A special trip to the forest, planned for her boys Tommy, Danny, and Luke right before they vanished. Now Howard was back, running a charity farm for kids, and Evie wasn't buying his saintly act. Not after the necklace, the shoe, and that threatening phone call. Stop digging, or you'll end up like them. They pulled off the highway onto a dirt road, the Chevy rattling over ruts. Howard's Haven for Hope loomed ahead, a sprawling farm surrounded by a sagging wooden fence. The main house was a weathered 2-story, its paint peeling like old skin. Barns and sheds dotted the property, and beyond them, a dense forest stretched out, its pines swallowing the sunlight. A sign by the gate read, "Hope for all," but the place felt more like a prison than a refuge. Evie parked near the house, her stomach twisting as she spotted a group of kids playing in a field. They were young, maybe 8 to 12, kicking a ball under the watchful eye of a woman in a long black coat, Clara Hensley. Her cold stare from the birthday party still burned in Evie's mind, that warning, some secrets are better left buried. Clara turned, spotting the Chevy, and her lips curled into a thin smile. "Here we go," Walter muttered, slipping the revolver into his waistband. "Stay sharp, Evie." They stepped out, the air thick, with the smell of damp earth and pine. Clara strode over, her boots crunching gravel, her smile sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Marlowe, Mr. Marlowe," she said, her voice smooth but laced with ice. "Didn't expect y'all out here. What brings you to our little haven?" "We're here to see Howard," Evie said, her tone flat. "Got some questions about our boys." Clara's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flicked to the forest, quick and nervous. "Howard's busy. He's with the kids, teaching them how to plant crops. You know how he has always given back." Funny," Walter said, stepping closer. "He wasn't so generous when he skipped town 30 years ago, right after our boys went missing." Clara's smile faltered, just for a second. "That was a long time ago, Mr. Marlowe. People change." "Not that much," Evie snapped. She pulled the letter from her pocket, holding it up. "Found this in my boys' things. From Howard, talking about a trip to the forest. You want to tell me what that's about?" Clara's eyes narrowed, but before she could answer, a man's voice called out. "Evie, Walter, my God, is that you?" Howard Fielding stepped from the house, his gray hair swept back, his smile warm but slippery. He was older now, pushing 70, but still had that teacher's charm, too polished, too perfect. "What a surprise." "No surprise," Evie said, her voice hard. "We're here about our boys. And this." She thrust the letter at him, her hand shaking. Howard's smile didn't budge, but his eyes flicked to the paper, then back to Evie. "Mrs. Marlowe, this place is about hope, not digging up old wounds. That letter's just a note from a teacher to his students, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Walter growled, stepping forward. "You invited our boys to the woods, then vanished when they did. You telling me that's a coincidence?" Howard raised his hands, calm as a preacher. "I love those boys. I was heartbroken when they went missing, but I had nothing to do with it. I left town to start fresh, that's all." Evie wasn't buying it. She glanced at Clara, who stood silent, her eyes darting between them. "Then why's my son's necklace showing up now?" Evie said, pulling the star pendant from her pocket. "And why's Ray Delgado's kid wearing Danny's jacket?" Howard's face twitched, just a flicker, but Evie caught it. "I don't know anything about that," he said, his voice too smooth. "Maybe you're seeing what you want to see." Clara stepped in, her voice low. "Y'all are upset, I get it, but you're scaring the kids. Why don't you come back another day?" "We ain't leaving," Evie said, her eyes locked on Howard. "Not till we get answers." Howard sighed, like he was humoring a child. "Fine, come inside. I'll show you what we do here. Maybe it'll ease your mind." The inside of the main house was dim, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and something sharp, like bleach. The walls were lined with paintings, dozens of them, all of kids. Some were smiling, others staring blankly, their eyes too big, too hollow. Evie's skin crawled as she passed a painting of a boy who looked eerily like Tommy, his blue eyes wide and pleading. She stopped, her breath catching. "Nice artwork, huh?" Howard said, his voice light. "The kids paint 'em. Helps 'em express themselves." Evie didn't answer. She glanced at Walter, who was glaring at the paintings, his hand hovering near his revolver. Clara led them to an office, its desk piled with papers, and a single photo frame showing Howard with a group of kids, all smiling too perfectly. Evie's eyes snagged on a notebook, its cover worn, tucked under a stack of folders. A 5-pointed star was scratched into the leather. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. Howard's smile tightened. "Just notes, lesson plans, schedules, nothing exciting." "Mind if I take a look?" Evie said, stepping toward the desk. Clara moved fast, blocking her. "Private property, Mrs. Marlowe. You want to snoop, get a warrant." Walter snorted. "Funny how y'all get jumpy over a notebook." "What's in it, Howard? Names of more kids you took to the woods?" Howard's face hardened, but he kept his tone even. "You're grieving, I understand, but you're barking up the wrong tree." "And?" Evie's eyes flicked to the notebook again. She needed to see it, but Clara's stare was a warning, and Howard's calm felt like a mask. They were hiding something. She could smell it, like the bleach in the air. "Fine," Evie said, stepping back. "We'll go, for now." As they turned to leave, a kid darted past the door, no older than 10, his eyes wide with fear. He dropped a crumpled piece of paper and bolted. Evie knelt, snatching it up before Clara could react. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "Don't trust the sheriff." Her heart skipped. She stuffed the paper in her pocket, avoiding Clara's gaze, and followed Walter out. The kids in the field had stopped playing, their eyes tracking Evie and Walter like silent sentinels. The forest beyond the fence seemed to pulse, its shadows thicker, darker. Back in the Chevy, Evie unfolded the note, her hands trembling. "Don't trust the sheriff," she read aloud. "That's Tom Carver. He was in charge when the boys went missing." Walter's face darkened. "Carver always said there was no evidence. Closed the case too fast. I never liked that bastard." Evie nodded, her mind racing. Carver had been young back then, a deputy who'd taken over the investigation after Walter was fired. He called Evie's theories hysterical, dismissed her questions about Howard. Now, a kid at Howard's Haven was warning her about him. It wasn't a coincidence. "We need to talk to that kid," Evie said. "The one who dropped this. He knows something." Walter shook his head. "You saw how they watched us. Clara and Howard ain't gonna let us near those kids. We need a plan." Evie's eyes drifted to the forest, its pines swaying in the wind. The letter's words echoed in her head. "The forest holds the truth. We're coming back tonight," she said, her voice low, "when they ain't expecting us." Walter's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "All right. But we're bringing the gun." That night, the fog was thicker, the forest a black void beyond the farm's fence. Evie and Walter parked a half-mile away, creeping through the woods with only a flashlight's dim beam. The air was heavy, the silence broken by the occasional snap of a twig or hoot of an owl. Evie's heart pounded, the star necklace in her pocket a cold weight. She couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. They reached the farm's edge, crouching behind a shed. The main house was dark, but a faint light glowed from a barn across the field. Evie's eyes snagged on a gate leading to the forest, its lock rusted but sturdy. "That's our way in," she whispered. Walter nodded, pulling a crowbar from his jacket. They moved fast, prying the gate open with a groan that echoed too loud in the quiet. The forest swallowed them, its pines towering overhead, their branches clawing at the sky. Evie's flashlight swept the ground, catching glints of something unnatural carvings, etched into tree trunks. 5-pointed stars, dozens of them, their lines deep and jagged. "Jesus," Walter whispered, his voice shaking. "What the hell is this?" Evie didn't answer. Her beam landed on a path, barely visible, leading deeper into the woods. At its end, a faint glow flickered, like a fire. They moved closer, the air growing colder, thicker with that bleach smell from the house. The path opened to a clearing, and Evie's breath caught. A wooden trapdoor, half hidden under leaves, sat in the ground, its edges carved with stars. Walter knelt, his crowbar ready. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Evie nodded, her heart hammering. She reached for the trapdoor, but before she could touch it, a spotlight blazed, blinding them. Clara's voice cut through the dark, cold and sharp. "Y'all shouldn't be here." Evie spun, her flashlight dropping. Shadows moved in the tree's figures, too many to count, closing in. Clara stepped forward, her coat flapping like wings, a shotgun in her hands. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" she said, her smile gone. Walter raised his revolver, but a figure lunged from the dark, knocking it from his grip. Evie's scream died in her throat as rough hands grabbed her, the star necklace slipping from her pocket and hitting the ground. The trapdoor loomed behind Clara, its secrets waiting, and Evie knew they'd just walked into a trap. The fog clung to Dusty Hollow like a bad memory, wrapping the town in a gray haze that made every shadow feel alive. Evie Marlowe gripped the steering wheel of her Chevy, her knuckles white, as she and Walter drove down Route 66, 5 miles out of town. The star-shaped necklace from Danny, her middle boy, hung heavy in her pocket, its cold metal, a constant reminder of the night before Ray Delgado burning that carved wooden box. The boy's eerie stare from the trailer window. She hadn't told Walter about sneaking to Ray's place. He'd call her reckless, maybe worse. But she couldn't shake the image of that kid, his eyes too old, too knowing, wearing her son's necklace. "You sure about this?" Walter asked, his voice rough from too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. He sat shotgun, his old service revolver tucked under his jacket, his notebook open on his lap. The page showed a crude sketch of a 5-pointed star, the same one carved under Danny's bed 30 years ago. Howard's Haven ain't exactly a welcome mat. Folks say it's a place for lost kids, but I don't trust it. "Neither do I," Evie said, her eyes fixed on the road. "Howard Fielding was the last one to see our boys. That letter we found? The forest holds the truth. He knows something, Walt. I can feel it in my bones." The letter, written in red ink and signed by Howard, had been a gut punch. A special trip to the forest, planned for her boys Tommy, Danny, and Lucarite, before they vanished. Now Howard was back, running a charity farm for kids, and Evie wasn't buying his saintly act. Not after the necklace, the shoe, and that threatening phone call. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like them." They pulled off the highway onto a dirt road, the Chevy rattling over ruts. Howard's Haven for Hope loomed ahead, a sprawling farm surrounded by a sagging wooden fence. The main house was a weathered 2-story, its paint peeling like old skin. Barns and sheds dotted the property, and beyond them, a dense forest stretched out, its pines swallowing the sunlight. A sign by the gate read, "Hope for All," but the place felt more like a prison than a refuge. Evie parked near the house, her stomach twisting as she spotted a group of kids playing in a field. They were young, maybe 8 to 12, kicking a ball under the watchful eye of a woman in a long black coat, Clara Hensley. Her cold stare from the birthday party still burned in Evie's mind, that warning, some secrets are better left buried. Clara turned, spotting the Chevy, and her lips curled into a thin smile. "Here we go," Walter muttered, slipping the revolver into his waistband. "Stay sharp, Evie." They stepped out, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. Clara strode over, her boots crunching gravel, her smile sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Marlowe, Mr. Marlowe," she said, her voice smooth but laced with ice. "Didn't expect y'all out here. What brings you to our little haven?" "We're here to see Howard," Evie said, her tone flat. "Got some questions about our boys." Clara's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flicked to the forest, quick and nervous. "Howard's busy. He's with the kids, teaching him how to plant crops. You know how he has always given back. Phew. Funny, Walter said, stepping closer. He wasn't so generous when he skipped town 30 years ago, right after our boys went missing. Clara's smile faltered, just for a second. That was a long time ago, Mr. Marlowe. People change. Not that much, Evie snapped. She pulled the letter from her pocket, holding it up. Found this in my boys' things, from Howard, talking about a trip to the forest. You want to tell me what that's about? Clara's eyes narrowed, but before she could answer, a man's voice called out. Evie? Walter? My God, is that you? Howard Fielding stepped from the house, his gray hair swept back, his smile warm but slippery. He was older now, pushing 70, but still had that teacher's charm, too polished, too perfect. What a surprise. No surprise, Evie said, her voice hard. We're here about our boys, and this. She thrust the letter at him, her hand shaking. Howard's smile didn't budge, but his eyes flicked to the paper, then back to Evie. Mrs. Marlowe, this place is about hope, not digging up old wounds. That letter's just a note from a teacher to his students. Nothing more. Nothing more? Walter growled, stepping forward. You invited our boys to the woods, then vanished when they did. You telling me that's a coincidence? Howard raised his hands, calm as a preacher. I love those boys. I was heartbroken when they went missing, but I had nothing to do with it. I left town to start fresh, that's all. Evie wasn't buying it. She glanced at Clara, who stood silent, her eyes darting between them. Then why's my son's necklace showing up now? Evie said, pulling the star pendant from her pocket. Then why's Ray Delgado's kid wearing Danny's jacket? Howard's face twitched, just a flicker, but Evie caught it. I don't know anything about that, he said, his voice too smooth. Maybe you're seeing what you want to see. Clara stepped in, her voice low. Y'all are upset. I get it. But you're scaring the kids. Why don't you come back another day? We ain't leaving, Evie said, her eyes locked on Howard. Not till we get answers. Howard sighed, like he was humoring a child. Fine, come inside. I'll show you what we do here. Maybe it'll ease your mind. The inside of the main house was dim, the air heavy with the smell of old wood, and something sharp, like bleach. The walls were lined with paintings, dozens of them, all of kids. Some were smiling, others staring blankly, their eyes too big, too hollow. Evie's skin crawled as she passed a painting of a boy who looked eerily like Tommy, his blue eyes wide and pleading. She stopped, her breath catching. Nice artwork, huh? Howard said, his voice light. The kids paint 'em. Helps them express themselves. Evie didn't answer. She glanced at Walter, who was glaring at the paintings, his hand hovering near his revolver. Clara led them to an office, its desk piled with papers and a single photo frame showing Howard with a group of kids, all smiling too perfectly. Evie's eyes snagged on a notebook, its cover worn, tucked under a stack of folders. A 5-pointed star was scratched into the leather. What's that? She asked, pointing. Howard's smile tightened. Just notes. Lesson plans. Schedules. Nothing exciting. Mind if I take a look? Evie said, stepping toward the desk. Clara moved fast, blocking her. Private property. Mrs. Marlowe. You want to snoop? Get a warrant. Walter snorted. Funny how y'all get jumpy over a notebook. What's in it, Howard? Names of more kids you took to the woods? Howard's face hardened, but he kept his tone even. You're grieving, I understand, but you're barking up the wrong tree. Evie's eyes flicked to the notebook again. She needed to see it, but Clara's stare was a warning, and Howard's calm felt like a mask. They were hiding something. She could smell it, like the bleach in the air. Fine, Evie said, stepping back. We'll go. For now. As they turned to leave, a kid darted past the door, no older than 10, his eyes wide with fear. He dropped a crumpled piece of paper and bolted. Evie knelt, snatching it up before Clara could react. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "Don't trust the sheriff." Her heart skipped. She stuffed the paper in her pocket, avoiding Clara's gaze, and followed Walter out. The kids in the field had stopped playing, their eyes tracking Evie and Walter like silent sentinels. The forest beyond the fence seemed to pulse, its shadows thicker, darker. Back in the Chevy, Evie unfolded the note, her hands trembling. "Don't trust the sheriff," she read aloud. "That's Tom Carver. He was in charge when the boys went missing." Walter's face darkened. "Carver always said there was no evidence. Closed the case too fast. I never liked that bastard." Evie nodded, her mind racing. Carver had been young back then, a deputy who'd taken over the investigation after Walter was fired. He'd called Evie's theories hysterical, dismissed her questions about Howard. Now, a kid at Howard's Haven was warning her about him. It wasn't a coincidence. "We need to talk to that kid," Evie said. "The one who dropped this. He knows something." Walter shook his head. "You saw how they watched us. Clara and Howard ain't gonna let us near those kids. We need a plan." Evie's eyes drifted to the forest, its pines swaying in the wind. The letter's words echoed in her head. "The forest holds the truth." "We're coming back tonight," she said, her voice low, "when they ain't expecting us." Walter's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "All right. But we're bringing the gun." That night, the fog was thicker, the forest a black void beyond the farm's fence. Evie and Walter parked a half-mile away, creeping through the woods with only a flashlight's dim beam. The air was heavy, the silence broken by the occasional snap of a twig or hoot of an owl. Evie's heart pounded, the star necklace in her pocket a cold weight. She couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. They reached the farm's edge, crouching behind a shed. The main house was dark, but a faint light glowed from a barn across the field. Evie's eyes snagged on a gate leading to the forest, its lock rusted but sturdy. "That's our way in," she whispered. Walter nodded, pulling a crowbar from his jacket. They moved fast, prying the gate open with a groan that echoed too loud in the quiet. The forest swallowed them, its pines towering overhead, their branches clawing at the sky. Evie's flashlight swept the ground, catching glints of something unnatural carvings, etched into tree trunks. 5-pointed stars, dozens of them, their lines deep and jagged. "Jesus," Walter whispered, his voice shaking. "What the hell is this?" Evie didn't answer. Her beam landed on a path, barely visible, leading deeper into the woods. At its end, a faint glow flickered, like a fire. They moved closer, the air growing colder, thicker with that bleach smell from the house. The path opened to a clearing, and Evie's breath caught. A wooden trapdoor, half hidden under leaves, sat in the ground, its edges carved with stars. Walter knelt, his crowbar ready. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Evie nodded, her heart hammering. She reached for the trapdoor, but before she could touch it, a spotlight blazed, blinding them. Clara's voice cut through the dark, cold, and sharp. "Y'all shouldn't be here." Evie spun, her flashlight dropping. Shadows moved in the tree's figures, too many to count. Closing in, Clara stepped forward, her coat flapping like wings, a shotgun in her hands. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" she said, her smile gone. Walter raised his revolver, but a figure lunged from the dark, knocking it from his grip. Evie's scream died in her throat as rough hands grabbed her, the star necklace slipping from her pocket and hitting the ground. The trapdoor loomed behind Clara, its secrets waiting, and Evie knew they'd just walked into a trap. Evie Marlowe's heart slammed against her ribs, as the spotlight pinned her and Walter in the forest clearing, the trapdoor at their feet pulsing with secrets. Clara Hensley's shotgun gleamed in the moonlight, her cold eyes locked on them like a predator sizing up prey. Shadows moved in the tree's figures, too many to count, circling like vultures. Walter's revolver was gone, knocked away by one of Clara's goons, and Evie's flashlight lay shattered on the ground. The star-shaped necklace, Danny's necklace, had slipped from her pocket, glinting in the dirt like a taunt. "Y'all are stubborn as mules," Clara said, her voice low and venomous. "Told you to stop digging. Now look where it's got you." Her coat flapped in the wind, the forest behind her a black void that seemed to breathe. Evie's hand shook, but her voice was steel. "What's under that trapdoor, Clara? What's Howard hiding?" Clara's lips curled, not quite a smile. "You think you're gonna find your boys down there? You're chasing ghosts, Mrs. Marlowe. Best let 'em rest." Walter lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. "You know what happened to him, don't you? You and that bastard Howard." A figure in the dark grabbed him, wrenching his arms behind his back. He grunted, struggling, but the man's grip was iron. "Enough," Clara snapped, raising the shotgun. "You're trespassing. I could shoot you both right now and call it self-defense. Nobody'd blink in this town." Evie's eyes flicked to the trapdoor, its star carvings barely visible in the shadows. The note from the kid at Howard's Haven burned in her pocket. "Don't trust the sheriff." Sheriff Tom Carver had been a young deputy when her boys vanished 30 years ago, quick to close the case, quick to call her crazy. Now, Clara's words and the kid's warning clicked together like puzzle pieces. "This ain't just about Howard, is it?" Evie said, her voice low. "Carver's in on it too." Clara's face twitched, just for a second, but it was enough. Evie's gut screamed she was right. Before Clara could respond, a twig snapped in the trees, and the figures froze. A low whistle cut through the night, sharp and urgent. Clara cursed under her breath, lowering the shotgun. "Get him out of here," she barked to the shadows. "We'll deal with him later." Rough hands shoved Evie and Walter back toward the gate, their boots stumbling over roots. The spotlight flicked off, plunging the forest into darkness. Evie's mind raced. She'd seen the trapdoor, the stars, Clara's reaction. They were close to something, too close. As they were pushed through the gate, she caught a glimpse of Clara kneeling by the trapdoor, her hands moving fast, like she was hiding something. The goons dumped them by their Chevy, parked a half-mile away. One of them, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, leaned close, his breath hot with whiskey. "Stay out of the woods, lady," he growled. "Next time, we ain't so nice." They sped off in a pickup, leaving Evie and Walter in the dust. Walter kicked the Chevy's tire, his face red. "God damn it, Evie. We almost got killed." "We found something," Evie said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That trapdoor. Clara's protecting it, and she didn't deny Carver's involved." Walter rubbed his bruised arm, his eyes dark. "Carver was always too slick. Closed the case in a month, said the boys just got lost. I never bought it." Evie pulled the kid's note from her pocket, its scrawled words stark in the moonlight. "This kid knows something. We gotta find him, and we gotta get into Carver's office. If he's hiding something about Howard, it's there." Walter nodded, his jaw tight. "All right, but we're playing with fire." The next morning, Dusty Hollow's Main Street was quiet, the diner's neon sign flickering in the gray dawn. Evie and Walter sat in their Chevy outside the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with a single flagpole out front. Sheriff Tom Carver's cruiser was parked in the lot, its hood still warm. Evie's stomach churned. Carver had been a deputy 30 years ago, barely out of his 20s, with a smile that charmed the town and a knack for dodging questions. He'd told Evie her boys probably wandered into the forest and got lost, maybe eaten by coyotes. She'd never forgiven him for that. "We can't just walk in and start snooping," Walter said, his voice low. "Carver's got eyes everywhere." "Then we wait," Evie said, her eyes fixed on the office. "He's got to leave sometime." They didn't wait long. An hour later, Carver strode out, his Stetson tilted low, and climbed into his cruiser. He peeled out, heading toward the highway. Evie and Walter slipped out of the Chevy, moving fast. The office's back door was unlocked. Small-town trust, or maybe arrogance. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old paper, the walls lined with faded wanted posters and a corkboard of community flyers. Evie headed straight for Carver's desk, its surface cluttered with files and a half-eaten donut. Walter kept watch by the window, his hand on his pocket where he'd stashed a spare knife. "Hurry up," he muttered. "This place gives me the creeps." Evie rifled through the drawers, her fingers shaking. Most were junk pins, receipts, a pack of gum. Then, in the bottom drawer, she found a locked metal box, its surface scratched, with a faint star pattern. Her heart skipped. "Walter, look at this." He glanced over, his eyes narrowing. "Can you open it?" She grabbed a letter opener from the desk and pried at the lock, her hands slick with sweat. The box popped open, revealing a stack of yellowed papers and a single photograph. Evie's breath caught. The photo showed Carver and Howard Fielding, young and grinning, standing in front of a pickup truck in the forest. On the truck's hood was a wooden box, its edges carved with 5 pointed stars, just like the one Ray Delgado had burned. "There's more," Evie said, pulling out a report dated 30 years ago. It was a case file on Howard, labeled Person of Interest in the boy's disappearance. The notes detailed complaints from parents about Howard's special lessons with kids, but the investigation was marked, "Closed, no evidence." Carver's signature was scrawled at the bottom. "That son of a bitch," Walter growled, reading over her shoulder. "He buried it. He was protecting Howard." Evie's eyes snagged on a name in the report, Clara Hensley, listed as a witness who'd vouched for Howard's alibi. "Clara," she whispered. "She's been in on it from the start." Before they could dig deeper, the front door creaked. Walter grabbed Evie's arm, pulling her behind a filing cabinet. Boots thudded on the floor, and Carver's voice boomed. "Who's in here?" he called, his tone sharp. Evie held her breath, clutching the photo and report. Walter's hand tightened on his knife, his eyes darting to the back door. Carver's footsteps stopped, and a radio crackled. "Yeah, I'm at the office," he said. "Thought I heard something. Probably nothing." The footsteps moved away, and the door slammed. Evie exhaled, her heart pounding. "We gotta get out of here," she whispered. They slipped out the back, the photo and report stuffed in Evie's jacket. Back in the Chevy, she spread the papers on the dashboard, her hands shaking. "Carver and Howard were buddies," she said. "This photo proves it." And Clara lied to protect him. Walter's face was grim. "We need to confront Carver. Tonight." "Oh." Evie shook her head. "Not yet. We need more. That kid's note said don't trust him. We gotta find that kid." That afternoon, Evie drove to the town library, a crumbling building with dusty shelves and a single librarian who barely looked up from her romance novel. Evie had a hunch if Carver was hiding something. There might be more in the archives. She spent hours digging through old newspapers, her eyes burning. Then, tucked in a box labeled MISC, she found it, a faded article from a neighboring town, dated 32 years ago. It described a missing child case, a boy named Billy Tate, last seen with a teacher named Howard Fielding. The case was dropped for lack of evidence, and the investigating officer, Tom Carver. Evie's blood ran cold. She copied the article, her hands trembling, and slipped it into her pocket with the report. Howard wasn't just a creep, he had a history, and Carver had covered for him before. She met Walter at Mabel's diner, the air thick with grease and coffee. He was nursing a Coke, his notebook open to a new page of scribbled theories. "Find anything?" he asked. Evie slid the article across the table. Howard was tied to another missing kid. Carver shut it down, just like he did with our boys. Walter's face darkened, his fist crumpling the edge of the article. "That bastard's been playing us for 30 years. I'm gonna kill him." "Not yet," Evie said, her voice low. "We need proof, something solid." And, as they spoke, a group of kids burst into the diner, laughing and shoving each other. One of them, a scrawny boy with freckles, froze when he saw Evie. It was the kid from Howard's Haven, the one who dropped the note. He turned to run, but Evie was faster, grabbing his arm gently. "Hey, kid," she said, her voice soft. "I got your note. I need to know what you meant." The boy's eyes darted, scared. "I can't talk here," he whispered. "They're watching." Who?" Evie pressed, her grip loosening but her eyes locked on his. The boy leaned close, his voice barely audible. "The sheriff, and the lady at the farm. They do things, in the woods." Before Evie could ask more, the diner door swung open, and Carver strode in, his Stetson casting a shadow. The boy yanked free and bolted, disappearing into the crowd. Carver's eyes landed on Evie and Walter, his smile thin and dangerous. "Y'all causing trouble again?" he said, his voice light but laced with threat. Walter stood, his fists clenched. "You tell us, Tom. What were you and Howard doing 30 years ago? Hiding something in the woods?" Carver's smile vanished. "You're out of line, Walt. Keep this up, and you'll end up in a cell." Evie stepped between them, her voice low. "We know about Billy Tate, and we know you covered for Howard. What else you hiding, Sheriff?" Carver's face twitched, his hand hovering near his holster. "You're digging a hole you can't climb out of," he said, then turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. Evie's heart raced. "He's scared," she said. "We're getting close." That night, Evie and Walter drove to the edge of town, their Chevy hidden behind a gas station. The forest loomed, its shadows thick with secrets. Evie clutched the photo of Carver and Howard, the article about Billy Tate, and the report from Carver's office. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still blurry. "We need to get back to that trapdoor," Evie said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Whatever they're hiding, it's there." Walter nodded, his knife glinting in the moonlight. "All right, but we're being careful this time." They set out, the forest swallowing them like a hungry beast. The air was cold, the bleach smell from the farm stronger now. Evie's flashlight caught more star carvings on the trees, their lines deeper, angrier. Her pocket buzzed her phone, vibrating with a new message. No caller ID. She opened it, her breath catching. It was a photo, a 5-pointed star carved into a tree, its bark stained red. Below it, a single line. "The truth is closer than you think." "Walter," she whispered, showing him the phone, his face paled, his hand tightening on the knife. Before they could move, headlights blazed through the trees, and a truck roared toward them, its tires chewing up the dirt. Evie grabbed Walter, pulling him behind a pine, but the truck swerved, cutting them off. Its door flew open, and a figure stepped out, too shadowed to see. A voice, low and gravelly, called out, "You're next. Hey, my." The truck gunned its engine, charging straight at them. Evie screamed, diving into the underbrush, as the bumper missed her by inches. Walter yanked her up, his face wild. "Run," he shouted. They sprinted through the forest, branches clawing at their faces, the truck's headlights chasing them. Evie's lungs burned, her legs screaming, but she didn't stop. The truth was out there, in that trapdoor, in those stars. And she'd be damned if she let it slip away again. Evie Marlowe's boots sank into the muddy forest floor as she and Walter sprinted through the pines, the truck's headlights slashing the darkness behind them. Branches clawed at her face, drawing blood, but she didn't stop. The voice from the truck, "You're next," echoed in her skull, a threat that felt like a noose tightening. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but the photograph, the report, and the article about Sheriff Tom Carver and Howard Fielding were still tucked in her jacket, proof they were close to unraveling the truth about her boys, missing for 30 years from Dusty Hollow, Texas. Walter stumbled beside her, his breath ragged, his knife glinting in the moonlight. "Keep moving," he gasped, glancing back. The truck's engine roared, its tires chewing up the dirt path, but the trees were too dense for it to follow. The headlights faded, and the forest fell silent, save for their heaving breaths and the distant hoot of an owl. Evie collapsed against a tree, her hands shaking as she clutched the star-shaped necklace in her pocket, Danny's necklace, a cruel relic of the son she'd lost. "They're trying to kill us, Walt," she whispered, her voice raw. "Carver, Clara, Howard, they're all in on it." Walter wiped sweat from his brow, his face pale. "That trapdoor back at the farm," he said, his voice low. "Whatever they're hiding, it's down there. We gotta get back." Evie nodded, her heart pounding. The note from the kid at Howard's Haven for Hope, "Don't trust the sheriff," and the article about a missing boy tied to Howard and Carver were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still blurry. The truck's attack wasn't just a warning, it was a sign they were too close. "We go back," she said, her voice steely. "But we need a plan. They're watching us." Walter's eyes flicked to the forest, its shadows thick and menacing. "We need that kid," he said. "The one who dropped the note. He knows something." Evie's mind raced. The boy's scared whisper, "They do things," in the woodshed chilled her to the bone. She pulled out her phone, the screen cracked from the chase, and checked the anonymous message again. A photo of a star carved into a tree, stained red, with the words, "The truth is closer than you think." "This came from someone who wants us to keep digging," she said. "Maybe the kid, maybe someone else." They crept back to their Chevy, hidden behind a gas station a half-mile away. The forest loomed, its pines swaying like silent judges. Evie's hands trembled as she started the engine, the photograph of Carver and Howard burning a hole in her pocket. They were running out of time. The next morning, Dusty Hollow was quiet, the fog still clinging to the streets like a bad dream. Evie and Walter sat in Mabel's diner, the air heavy with grease and coffee. The article about Billy Tate, the boy who'd vanished 32 years ago, lay on the table, its words damning. Howard Fielding, a suspect, cleared by a young Deputy Tom Carver. Evie's coffee grew cold as she stared at it, her mind churning. "We need to find that kid," she said, her voice low. "He's at Howard's Haven, but Clara and Howard won't let us near him." Walter sipped his Coke, his notebook open to a page of star sketches. "We could sneak in again, but after last night, they'll be waiting. We need something to distract them." Evie's eyes flicked to the diner's window, where a group of local kids kicked a ball in the street. One of them, a scrawny boy with freckles, caught her eye, the same kid from Howard's Haven. "That's him," she whispered, standing. "Come on." And they slipped out, following the boy as he wandered toward the town park. He was alone now, his backpack slung low, his eyes darting like he expected trouble. Evie approached slowly, her hands raised. "Hey, kid," she said, her voice soft. "I'm not gonna hurt you. I got your note." The boy froze, his freckles stark against his pale face. "I didn't write nothing," he muttered, but his eyes betrayed him, wide and scared. "I know you're scared," Evie said, kneeling to his level. "But you said don't trust the sheriff. Why? What's going on at that farm?" The boy glanced around, his voice barely a whisper. "They take kids to the woods, at night. I saw 'em. The sheriff, the lady, the old man. They do stuff down there." Evie's heart skipped. "What kind of stuff?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, but I heard screaming once, and there's a door in the ground. They don't let us near it." Walter stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You ever see a star carved anywhere? Like on a tree or a box?" The boy nodded, pointing to his backpack. "Found this." He pulled out a small wooden charm, its surface etched with a 5-pointed star. "It was in the barn. I wasn't supposed to take it." Evie's breath caught. It was identical to Danny's necklace. "Keep it hidden," she said, her voice urgent. "And stay away from the farm tonight. We're going back." The boy nodded, then bolted, disappearing into the park. Evie turned to Walter, her face grim. "We're ending this tonight. That trapdoor's got answers." The forest was a black maze, as Evie and Walter crept back to Howard's Haven, their flashlight beams slicing through the fog. The farm was dark, its buildings looming like ghosts. Evie's heart pounded, the kids' words echoing. "They do stuff down there." The star charm, the trapdoor, the carvings all pointed to something sinister, something Carver and Howard had buried for decades. They reached the clearing from the night before, the trapdoor still there, its star carving stark in the moonlight. Walter knelt, his crowbar ready, but Evie grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered, pointing to a faint glow deeper in the woods. "Look." A flicker of light danced between the trees, like a campfire. They moved closer, silent as shadows, the bleach smell from the farm stronger now, sharp and chemical. The glow came from a small shack, its windows boarded, its door ajar. Evie's pulse raced as she peered inside. Papers were scattered across a table, and a single lantern cast eerie shadows. On the wall, a map of the forest was pinned, marked with red X's and stars. Walter nudged her, pointing to a leather-bound book on the table. Its cover was etched with a star, just like the notebook in Howard's office. Evie flipped it open, her hands trembling. Pages listed names dozens of kids, their ages and dates scribbled in red ink. Her boys' names were there, Tommy, Danny, Luke, each with a check mark and the word processed. Processed? Walter whispered, his voice shaking. What the hell does that mean? Evie's stomach churned. She turned the page, finding a sketch of the trapdoor, labeled entry point. Below it, a note in Howard's neat handwriting. The project requires sacrifice. The forest keeps them safe. Before she could read more, a floorboard creaked outside. They froze, the lantern's light flickering. A man's voice, low and familiar, drifted through the door. "You shouldn't be here." Evie's heart stopped. It wasn't Howard or Carver, it was a stranger, his voice calm but heavy with threat. She turned, clutching the book, and saw him in the doorway, tall, maybe 40, with dark hair and a scar across his hand, a star-shaped scar. "Who are you?" Evie demanded, her voice trembling. The man stepped into the light, his eyes cold but oddly familiar. "Name's John," he said. "I work for Howard. You're messing with things you don't understand." Evie's breath caught. His eyes blue, piercing, like Tommy's, her youngest boy, gone at 6, would be about this man's age now. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "Tommy, is that you?" The man's face twitched, confusion flickering. "Lady, I don't know you. My name's John." Walter grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "Evie, we gotta go." But Evie couldn't move. She stared at the man's scar, her mind reeling. "You're my boy," she whispered, tears spilling. "Tommy, it's me. Your mama." And John's eyes darkened, his hand clenching. "You're crazy," he said, but his voice wavered, like something deep inside was stirring. Before he could say more, footsteps crunched outside, and Clara's voice cut through the night. "John, get him." John hesitated, his eyes locked on Evie's, but then he lunged, grabbing her arm. Walter swung his crowbar, catching John's shoulder, but more figures emerged from the trees. Clara and her goons, their faces shadowed. "Tie him up," Clara ordered, her shotgun gleaming. "They've seen too much." Evie struggled as rough hands bound her wrists, the book slipping from her grip. John's face was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on her, haunted. They were dragged back to the clearing, the trapdoor looming like a grave. Clara knelt, unlocking it with a key from her coat, the hinges groaning as it opened. A staircase descended into darkness, the bleach smell overwhelming. "Get him down there," Clara said, her voice cold. "Howard'll decide what to do." Evie's heart raced as they were shoved toward the stairs. She looked at John, her voice desperate. "Tommy, if you're in there, please, help us." John's face twitched again, but he said nothing, pushing her forward. Walter cursed, struggling against his ropes, but the goons were too strong. The trapdoor slammed shut above them, plunging them into darkness. The air was thick, the walls damp, and the sound of dripping water echoed. Evie's mind screamed this was where the truth lived, where her boy's fate was buried. They were pushed into a concrete room, its walls lined with shelves of files and strange equipment, like something from a lab. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Clara stood at the center, her shotgun lowered but ready. "Y'all couldn't leave it alone," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Now you're gonna see what happens to folks who dig too deep." Evie's eyes darted, landing on a file labeled Project Starlight. Her boys' names were on it, along with dozens of others. She lunged for it, but Clara's goon grabbed her, slamming her against the wall. Walter roared, fighting his ropes, but a fist to his stomach dropped him to his knees. "Stop it!" John shouted, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, his scar glinting in the dim light. "Clara, this ain't right." "Pen." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You stay out of this, John. You know what's at stake." Evie stared at him, her heart breaking. "Tommy," she whispered. "You're my boy. I know it." John's face crumpled, his hands shaking. I don't know," he muttered, clutching his head. "I don't remember." Before Clara could react, a loud crash echoed from above, followed by shouts. Flashlights blazed through the trapdoor, and a kid's voice screamed, "They're down there." It was the boy from Howard's Haven, the one with the note. He'd followed them, brought help, maybe Mabel, maybe someone else. Clara cursed, raising her shotgun, but John tackled her, the gun skidding across the floor. "Run," he shouted, his voice raw. Evie and Walter broke free, scrambling for the stairs, but Clara's goons were on them, fists flying. The kid's voice echoed again, closer now, and flashlight beams flooded the room. Evie grabbed the Project Starlight file, her heart pounding, and sprinted up the stairs, Walter behind her. John stayed below, wrestling Clara, his face torn with confusion. They burst into the clearing, the forest alive with chaos kids from the farm, some with flashlights, others screaming. The boy with the freckles stood at the edge, his eyes wide. "I told Mabel," he shouted. "She's coming with help." But before Evie could answer, a gunshot cracked from below, echoing through the trees. She froze, her heart stopping. John Tommy was down there, and Clara wasn't done. Part 6. Truth and Reckoning, Justice or Tragedy. The gunshot echoed through the forest, a sharp crack that froze Evie Marlowe's blood. She stood in the clearing outside Howard's Haven for Hope, the trapdoor to the underground chamber yawning open behind her, its secrets spilling into the night. Walter panted beside her, his face bruised from the scuffle below, the Project Starlight file clutched in her trembling hands. The freckled boy from the farm, the one who'd warned her not to trust the sheriff, stood at the edge of the clearing, his flashlight shaking as he shouted, "Mabel's coming, she's got help." But the gunshot from the hammock below where John, the man who might be her lost son Tommy, had tackled Clara rooted Evie to the spot. Her heart screamed, "Was that him? Was that my boy?" "Evie, move," Walter hissed, grabbing her arm. Flashlights bobbed in the distance, voices shouting Mabel, and whoever she'd rallied. But Evie couldn't leave, not with John down there, not with the truth so close. She yanked free, turning back to the trapdoor, its dark mouth beckoning like a grave. "We can't leave him," she cried, her voice raw. "If that's Tommy, I ain't losing him again." Before Walter could stop her, she scrambled down the concrete stairs, the bleach smell choking her, the air cold and damp. The chamber was a mess, files scattered, equipment toppled, the single bulb flickering like a dying star. Clara lay on the floor, her shotgun beside her, a red stain spreading across her coat. John stood over her, his face pale, his hand shaking. The star-shaped scar on his hand glinted, and his eyes, Tommy's eyes, were wide with shock. "John," Evie shouted, rushing to him. "Are you hurt?" He turned, his face a mask of confusion. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice breaking. "She was gonna shoot you." Evie's heart twisted. She reached for him, but he flinched, stepping back. "Stay away," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know you. I don't know what's happening." "You're my boy," Evie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Tommy Marlowe. You were 6 when they took you. Look at me, please." John's eyes flickered, something stirring behind them, but before he could speak, boots thundered down the stairs. Mabel, the diner owner, burst in, her gray hair wild, a hunting rifle in her hands. Behind her were 2 men, local farmers, their faces grim. "Evie," Mabel shouted. "You okay?" "Clara's down," Evie said, her voice shaking. "And this man, he might be my Tommy." Mabel's eyes widened, but she nodded, turning to the farmers. "Get her out of here," she said, pointing to Clara. "And call the state police. This ain't Carver's jurisdiction no more." In. The farmers dragged Clara's limp form up the stairs, her groans fading. Evie turned back to John, her hands outstretched. "Please," she said, "come with us. We'll figure this out." John shook his head, backing toward the wall. I'm not him," he muttered, but his voice wavered, like a memory was clawing its way free. Walter grabbed Evie's shoulder. "We gotta go, darlin'. This place ain't safe." Reluctantly, Evie followed, clutching the Project Starlight file. John trailed behind, his steps hesitant, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. The freckled boy waited above, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog. "I told him everything," he said, his voice small, "about the woods, the sheriff, all of it." Evie knelt, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "You did good, kid. What's your name?" "Benny," he whispered. They scared me. Said I'd end up like the others if I talked." Evie's stomach twisted. "What others?" Benny's eyes filled with tears. "Kids. They take him to the woods. I saw him. Back at Mabel's diner, the air was thick with tension. The state police were on their way, their sirens a faint wail in the distance. Evie sat at a corner booth, the Project Starlight file open before her, its pages a nightmare in ink. Lists of names, dozens of kids, some from Dusty Hollow, others from towns across Texas marked with dates and cryptic notes. Processed, relocated, terminated. Her boys' names were there. Tommy, Danny, Luke. Tommy's had a star next to it, the word relocated, scrawled in red. Walter paced, his fists clenched. This ain't just Howard, he growled. This is big. Carver, Clara, maybe the whole damn town. John sat across from Evie, his hands folded, his face unreadable. She couldn't stop staring at him, those blue eyes, the scar, the way his jaw set like Tommy's used to. John, she said softly, do you remember anything? A house with a blue door? A dog named Rusty? Your brothers? John's face twitched, his hands trembling. I don't know, he said. I grew up in foster homes. No family, no memories before I was 10, but I dream sometimes. A forest, a star carved in a tree, a woman calling my name. Evie's heart broke. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his eyes haunted. I ain't your kid, he said, but his voice cracked, like he wasn't sure. Mabel slid into the booth, her rifle propped against the wall. State police will be here soon, she said. Benny told me everything. Said he saw Carver and Clara taking kids to the woods at night. Heard him talking about a project. Evie opened the file, her hand shaking. A page detailed, Project Starlight, a twisted experiment funded by someone with deep pockets. The words were clinical, cold, behavioral modification, memory suppression, reintegration. Her boys had been part of it, taken for reasons she couldn't fathom. Danny and Luke were marked, terminated, but Tommy's relocated gave her a sliver of hope. Before she could read more, the diner door slammed open, and Sheriff Tom Carver stormed in, his Stetson low, his hand on his holster. Y'all are causing a hell of a mess, he said, his voice smooth but deadly. Hand over that file, Evie. Walter lunged, but Mabel raised her rifle, her eyes hard. Not another step, Tom, she said. State police are coming. You're done. Carver's smile was thin, dangerous. You think they'll believe you? A washed-up deputy and a crazy mama chasing ghosts? I run this town. Evie stood, the file clutched to her chest. We got proof, she said, her voice shaking with rage. Your signature on Howard's case, the photo of you two together, Billy Tate's file, you covered it all up. Carver's face twitched, his hand inching toward his gun. You don't know what you're messing with, he said. This is bigger than me. Bigger than Howard. John stood, his voice low. Then tell us, he said, stepping forward. What did you do to those kids? To me? Carver's eyes flicked to John, and for a moment, something like fear crossed his face. You don't remember a damn thing, do you? He said. Good, keeps you safe. Evie's heart stopped. You knew, she whispered. You knew he was my Tommy. Carver laughed, cold and hollow. You think you're gonna get a happy ending. Your boys are gone, Evie. Let it go. Before she could respond, sirens wailed outside, red and blue lights flashing through the diner's windows. Carver's face paled, but he didn't move, his hand still on his gun. This ain't over, he said, backing toward the door. Mabel cocked her rifle. Stay put, Tom, or I'll put you down myself. Carver froze, his eyes darting. Then, in a blur, he drew his gun, aiming at Evie. John moved faster, tackling him to the floor, the gun skidding across the linoleum. Walter pinned Carver's arms, his face twisted with rage. You're done, you bastard, he growled. The state police burst in, their shouts filling the diner. Carver was cuffed, his curses muffled as they dragged him out. Evie collapsed into the booth, the file slipping from her hands. John sat across from her, his face torn, his scar glinting under the fluorescent lights. The next morning, Dusty Hollow was crawling with state police, their cruisers lining the streets. Howard's haven for hope was cordoned off, its barns and house searched, the trapdoor chambers sealed as evidence. Clara was in a hospital, alive but critical, her secrets locked in her silence. Howard Fielding was gone, vanished into the night, his whereabouts unknown. Evie sat in a state police office, the Project Starlight file spread, before a detective named Harris. He was young, his face serious but kind. "This is bad," he said, flipping through the pages. "Names, dates, location sits in network. Kids taken, experimented on. Some killed. Your boys were part of it." Evie's throat tightened. "Danny and Luke, they're gone, ain't they?" Harris nodded, his eyes soft. "I'm sorry. The file says they didn't make it, but Tommy Johnny's listed as relocated. We're running DNA to confirm." Evie looked across the room, where John sat with a coffee, his eyes distant. He hadn't spoken to her since the diner, but he hadn't left either. "You don't remember me," she said, her voice breaking. "Memory suppression," Harris said. "The file mentions drugs, hypnosis. Whoever ran this project wanted those kids to forget who they were." Walter sat beside her, his hand on hers. "We got him back, Evie," he said, his voice rough. "That's something." Evie nodded, tears falling. "But it ain't enough." Weeks later, Evie stood in her backyard, the forest looming beyond. John had agreed to the DNA test, and the results were clear. He was Tommy, her youngest, stolen at 6 and turned into someone else. He was staying in town, working with a therapist to dig up memories, but he still called himself John, still flinched when she reached for him. Danny and Luke were gone, their fates sealed in that cold file, victims of a twisted scheme that stretched beyond Dusty Hollow. The state police had arrested Carver, and the investigation was spreading, implicating officials in other towns. Project Starlight was a network, funded by Shatters, its purpose still unclear. Howard was still out there, a ghost in the wind, and Evie swore she'd find him someday. She held Tommy's shoe, the one from the porch, and Danny's star necklace, her fingers tracing their edges. The forest was quiet now, its secrets cracked open, but the pain lingered, sharp and raw. She'd found one son, but the cost was 30 years and 2 graves she'd never see. Evaluation and lessons learned from the perspective of criminal psychologists and law enforcement experts. Cases like Project Starlight reveal the chilling reality of organized crime in small communities, where trust in local authorities can be exploited to hide atrocities. Dusty Hollow's isolation made it a perfect breeding ground for secrets, with figures like Sheriff Carver leveraging their power to silence questions. The use of memory suppression, as seen with John, Tommy, points to sophisticated methods to erase victims' identities, a tactic seen in real-world trafficking networks. Leçon. Communities must remain vigilant, questioning even those in positions of trust. Small towns aren't immune to corruption. They can be its cradle. Families of missing persons need long-term support, not just to cope with grief but to pursue justice, no matter how long it takes. Warning: if you suspect a child is missing or a local figure is involved in wrongdoing, report it immediately to state or federal authorities. Don't trust local systems alone. Secrets thrive in silence. Keep asking questions, even when the answers hurt.